Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this edition of the Cameroon Town Hall for Healthcare Professionals. We are here again. It's going to be an exciting session today. We always meet every 2 weeks, and this is the town hall that brings together health experts from Cameroon. And we are on our platform now, a total of about 124 participants that have registered and participated in at least one session. And this is drawn from about 34 countries. So this has been on, and I think this is the 47th session of the town hall. We've never skipped a session since we started, 2 years, almost getting to 2 years now. And we meet every 2 weeks to share ideas on how we can improve on the healthcare situation in Cameroon. We are made up of doctors, nurses, lab technicians, pharmacists, researchers, and community workers, midwives, everybody that is interested in improving healthcare in our country. And so this was an initiative that was conceived by Muno and others, and we have kept this promise that we are going to continue to provide our own little support that we can provide for the country to improve on our healthcare. Last week, we had a kind of a resume of what all those who have been presenters or speakers in the town hall are doing in their respective spirit to improve or create impact at home. And this was in response to the question we've been asked, like, why is it that the town hall only speaks but does not take action? But we wanted to prove that action can be when you understand the problem and you start talking about it. But of course, at individual level, we realize that people are doing amazing things back home to contribute to the wellness of our people. And so we had to kind of profile every member of the town hall who had taken on stage to share their area of expertise. And it was amazing to see the work that members of this town hall are doing. I want to thank all those who were tuning in last week. And I want to greet all of you who are tuning in this week for yet another very exciting topic. We have heard in the past and recently that there are so many cases of child abuse in Cameroon perpetrated among children, especially those living with disability. And this further undermine their development, especially when you want to think about the long-term consequences of this kind of abuses that children suffer in Cameroon. And when I was preparing for this session and just looking through some research out there, it was astounding to understand that a publication states that almost 50% of children in Cameroon have been abused in one way or the other. So the question is, what constitutes an abuse, and who is supposed to report an abuse, and what are the legal implications surrounding this topic, and how can we prevent this from happening? These are the kinds of things we shall be getting in knowledge from today from some experts that are trusted authorities in this subject. We've brought in somebody who will be speaking from the medical perspective, as somebody, a legal luminary who will be looking at some of the legal implications of this topic. Please stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting exercise. But before we start, let me check with the other co-moderators. I have a wonderful team of excellent, beautiful, and handsome moderators. We always prepare this session for you. And let me start with Brian. Hi, Brian. Hello.
Hi, Elvis. Thanks a lot. Really great to see everyone, and it's great to have everyone tune in. It's always a pleasure to connect with everyone. Thrilled to have Dr. Judwin and Barrister Joyce to talk about this very important subject. So thanks a lot, and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Brian. And I know before we get to the discussion, you and Muno will take us to the world of variants and the world of genetic sequencing. And I know you're still going to say something when Muno presents the update. So, Alison.
Hi, Elvis. Hi, everyone. Those of you joining us on Zoom and those of you watching us on social media, I hope you're well. I hope your families are well. I'm excited, Elvis. Like, they usually say at times when you don't look for something, you don't see it. And it's interesting that the minute this topic came up and, it was planned to be discussed today, for the past week, I just kept seeing child abuse cases on social media. And I'm like, why has my eye not been picking up these things? It just made me realize it's a lot more common than we think. And I'm excited that Judwin and Joyce would be tackling this subject today.
Of course, Judwin and Joyce are the best we could get to talk about this issue today. Thank you so much, Alison, and I look forward for an exciting session. Therese. Hi, Therese. What's happening in Seattle today? Okay, while we wait for Thérèse, Christelle, bonjour.
Bonjour Elvis, bonsoir.
J'espère que tu n'as pas pleuré hier quand le Cameroun n'a pas gagné.
Non, je n'ai même pas regardé le match. Je n'ai pas regardé le match.
Pour le cardio, c'est bon.
C'est bon pour la cardio. Il faut protéger sa vie, il faut vivre longtemps.
Okay. So how are you today?
Bonsoir. Ça va, merci, je vais bien. Bonsoir à tout le monde, bonsoir à Dr. Judwin, bonsoir à Maître Joyce. Merci d'avoir accepté l'invitation de Cameroon Town Hall aujourd'hui, cette nouvelle édition, et bienvenue à chacun depuis où vous nous joignez, et nous espérons que cette séance sera aussi fructueuse que les précédentes. Merci encore.
Thank you so much, Christelle. Thanks for joining from Cameroon. And we have Louisa Viban, who is one of our moderators from Canada. She's held up with her residency assignment today, and she might not be able to join us full time. Let me check again to see if Thérèse is on. Thérèse? Okay, while we wait for Thérèse, now I go to our chair, Dr. Mono Ken, who is the brain behind all what is happening here. Hi, Mono, I know today you're going to take us with updates about COVID-19. We hear there is a new variant. We know you are updated. We know you already have dug deep to know what's happening. Should we be worried?
Well, Elvis, just because I think I'm going to give an update next week. We're waiting to see how things go. And really, there is the BA2, which is not really a new variant. It's part of the Omicron. And I think we should be worried because we're getting complacent, especially those who are in the US. And Europe, in the UK, we're already seeing a number of cases that are rising. And we're seeing that there is actually something that we need to pay attention to. But I don't think it's going to be as bad as the Omicron itself. And there are other things coming on which we need to pay attention to, which we're going to discuss next week. Just because of time, I didn't want to take time out of this topic. It's one of the topics which I felt the day Judwin talked about this, I felt like a light was being shined upon me to realize exactly how much we neglect this topic because it's become a norm in our society. And because when things become norms, we just accept them the way they are and we don't really turn to try to tackle the problem. So I'm very excited that I have two wonderful friends and also advocates who are advocates of children's rights from the time I know them. One is a pediatrician, one is a lawyer, and they are also very, very enthusiastic about this topic and actually would lead the discussion and actually help us realize where we go from here. So Elvis, I want to say thank you, and you guys are always wonderful. And I just want to remind everyone, this platform, I know Elvis keeps talking about, this platform belongs to the people. It belongs to us all. If you know a wonderful speaker, if you want to come over and talk to us about something you feel has lasting effects on healthcare, and even on societal discussions as a whole, you're always welcome. So Elvis, over to you, thanks.
Thank you so much, Mono, and I'm happy. I'm sure you're preparing a very big package for us, the next session on COVID. A lot would have happened between now and then. And I can see Thérèse has joined us. Hello, Thérèse. Welcome.
Hi, Elvis, and hi to everyone, and welcome again once more to this edition of the Town Hall. And I think this is a very special topic to all of us, especially mothers and all those that have kids. And yeah, so I hope we have a great time today.
We are going to have a very great time, especially the fact that we are in the hands of medical people and someone who is a pediatrician and also a human rights enthusiast, as well as a legal luminaries like Joyce Nyamboli. Of course, today is going to be an exciting session, but before, let's just hear a little bit about this topic, why the topic, from our own moderator, Dr. Brian Tekomo.
Yeah, thanks. A lot is happening in the world, and I heard Mona talking about this. The information about even the Omicron variant is really so overwhelming. I think one of the things that has become glaringly obvious to us is really how important it is for us to improve on our data capturing systems globally, and to be really aware of the inequities and the issues that we have, public health issues that we have globally. We received an email from the director of the CDC last week that talked about really the importance of us improving how data is being captured and data is being analyzed, and how that data can be used in real time. So I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons we are coming out of this pandemic with, is really understanding how important it is for us to strengthen our data capturing system, particularly for us in Africa, where we have very weak systems for data capture in general. It's truly an honor for me today to have Dr. Judwin, who is a pediatrician, and also Barrister Nyamboli, to talk to us today about this really very important subject. We all know that children worldwide face a lot of harm and insidious exploitation and abuse, and this violence against children has no boundaries. It's something that's happening. It's happening globally. It happens in every single country, in every single continent, and in most of the time, this abuse against children happens in places where children expect to be most protected. So in places like schools, in their homes, and usually even in the hands of people they trust to protect them. So it's a very big issue, and I'm really thrilled that we have two very important experts to talk about this very important subject. I remember back when I was in Cameroon, and I worked in the Manfe District Hospital in the middle of the humanitarian crisis, that crisis that happened. The ongoing crisis between both zones, and some of the things that happens when there is a humanitarian crisis of this nature is children are torn apart from their families, right? And they are made to be more vulnerable. They are exposed to exploitation and abuse, and these children can be recruited by armed forces. So this is a really big issue. Again, this is just one example in Cameroon, but this is being expanded. This happens almost globally, and we are seeing the consequences of this occurring globally. So no matter what the circumstance or the story is, I think that children have the right to be protected from violence, and they have a right to be protected from all kinds of exploitation and abuse. So we are really thrilled to have these two experts help us really dive into this subject, and so we can have a really genuine conversation on this subject. So thanks a lot, Elvis, for the invitation, and thanks a lot for introducing this. So I'm really looking forward to having a really great exchange and great discussion today. So I'm going to turn it over to Christelle to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Barrister Nyamboli. So Christelle, take it away.
Thank you, Brian, for giving me the floor. So I'm honored and privileged to introduce Barrister Joyce Nyamboli. I'm sure she's wondering how and what will I say about her, but nothing much. We just try to go and dip a bit online to have to know who you are, and have a brief presentation about all your immense contribution to the rights in Cameroon. So Barrister Joyce Nyamboli is an advocate of the Cameroon Bar and human rights expert with a keen interest in the rights of women and children. Civil society activist, conference organizer, and political analyst, since the start of the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon in 2016, Barrister Joyce turned her attention towards the victims of human rights abuses and political prisoners engaging in activism and litigation. She's currently working on transforming her master's in law thesis titled Southern Cameroon, Right to Self-Determination under International Human Rights Law into a book as she continues to monitor the unfolding of the crisis. So she regularly contributes in several platforms like our own today, but also to local newspapers addressing both legal and political situation in the countries. Additionally, she has many colleagues in the town hall, both from PSS Mancon and also from around the world. So we are very thrilled to welcome her today, and it's an immense honor to have you today. Thank you for joining with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Christelle, for doing this wonderful introduction. And when you were doing the introduction, I realized that there is somebody who knows a little bit, some additional details that, I know you will not find it online. So let's get some of those things you will not find online about Joyce from Muno.
Okay, I've known Joyce, I think, more than half of my life span on earth. We've been very close friends. So what I can add about Barrister Joyce, Joyce has been an advocate the same number of years I've been a physician. I think we both started together in Bamenda. We're all in Yaoundé together. Joyce has been an advocate and a barrister for 14 years, 14 good years. So that's how much experience she has. That's when she opened her law firm. These were one of the few courageous young people who opened a law firm, which is still existing in Bamenda. I think it's one of the biggest law firms that is presently there in Bamenda. And Joyce actually had her degree from the University of Swar, which were friends back in the days. And later on, she did a master's in IRIC. She was already a barrister then, but she did a master in IRIC in International Cooperation for Development of Humanitarian Action. She has always been in the whole humanitarian sphere for a long time now. And later on, I'm not going to be able to tell everything about Joyce, but Joyce also has a master's in human rights and humanitarian law from the UK. So she's not just a stranger in this whole thing. I know a lot of people will be asking questions. She hates me. She doesn't love me to talk about her academic background. She has a lot more, which Joyce doesn't want me to start portraying it. Joyce is actually a big advocate for child's right and women's right. That's what I know about her. If there's something I can retain is that she's an advocate and she's going to put her hands anywhere a child is going to be abused or any female who is going to be abused. So she's going to be there. So Joyce, I just want you to continue doing what you're doing and thank you for accepting to be part of this platform and also to join our other wonderful moderator, Dr. Judwin, our other wonderful presenters so that you guys can co-present this topic and we can have a wonderful discussion. So Elvis, over to you, please.
Good. And thank you so much. And now let's discover Dr. Judwin. But of course, she's an old name in the town hall. In my opinion, they would not have introduced her, but for the sake of those who are attending the town hall for the first time, let's get to know her.
Okay, so I'm really excited to introduce Judwin. It's always a pleasure for me to talk about her. I can rant about Judwin all day. She's like a sister, she's a friend. She's one of those people that I can probably present without a bio because, I've known her for that long and her work is just amazing. So a little bit about Judwin's academic journey. So Judwin trained as a medical doctor at the Faculty of Health Sciences in the University of Buea. And from there, she got awarded a Chevening Scholarship to study public health nutrition in the UK, University of Southampton, and she's currently finishing up with her residency in Nottingham, where she's being trained as a pediatrician. With regards to her future goals, Judwin is aspiring to be a pediatric gastroenterologist and nutritionist. And one thing about Judwin, for those of you who've had the chance to meet her, is she always tells you to keep account of your steps. If you're not eating right, Judwin comes after you. If you're not exercising right, Judwin comes after you. If you're doing anything that is going to hurt a child, Judwin comes after you. With regards to her work life, she has worked with, some really, both locally in the Cameroon context with the government, And she has also worked with some international organizations such as Médecins Sans Frontières and the French Red Cross, where she focused mostly on caring for children who were malnourished, refugee children coming in from other countries who were malnourished, as a result of the fact that they were being displaced from their settings. And like I said, she's one person who is very passionate about food and the rights of children. So Judwin, it's always a pleasure to have you back. I'm sure that the whole CamDoc UK will probably be watching as well and providing support, because in addition to the great work she does in the hospitals, she's also a very strong advocate in our African communities about education, and she's currently the Secretary General for CamDoc UK. So Ju, welcome, welcome, welcome. Always a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you so much, Alison, for presenting Judwin. But one thing you said about Judwin I don't like is about food, that she would watch what you eat. I thought she was going to be my friend. Now you make me feel like if she's my friend, I'll have to hide before I eat. But of course, I know it's for our good, and she's always going to take good care of our health. Thank you so much for presenting, Dr. Judwin. Of course, you both have the platform now to tell us about child abuse or the welfare of children in the Cameroonian context.
Thank you so much, Elvis, Alison, Muno, everyone, for once more giving me the platform to talk about things that I'm passionate about. I suppose everyone can hear me.
Yes,
okay,
we can hear you.
Excellent. So I'm going to share my screen. Is everyone able to see my screen? Okay, let's
yes,
see
we can see your screen.
Presentation.
Yes, perfect.
Right. Okay. So I'm Judwin, as Alison has said. But today is a very special day. So you've got 2 PEMEXANs and 2 Chevening scholars presenting. So I think it's a really special day. Okay. So the topic of safeguarding children is something that I care very much about. Right from when I worked in Cameroon at the Médecins Sans Frontières, Red Cross, with multi-agency working, is something that it was really part of our day-to-day working and life. And coming to England, where people are very, very strong on child safeguarding. Like when people hear of social services, families get scared, and that's really not the aim of social services. That families get scared thinking, oh, they're coming to take care of my children. But no, the whole aim of safeguarding is to really look after children. I'm going to be talking a bit more. So for starters, I'd like us to have a look. So Alison, is the poll ready? You're muted.
Oh, sorry. I think we could use a show of hands because the settings just won't let us do it right now.
Okay, that's all right. We can always we'll figure it out. Are you able to count the hands?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to ask. I'll show a few sets. I'll show a few sets of pictures. I'm going to ask people to tell me if they think this is abuse or not, or if we need to raise any safeguarding concerns. So first picture, this is a 12-year-old girl. She's getting married to this elderly-looking man in some village in northern Cameroon. Are we worried? How worried are we? Do we think there's any safeguarding concerns, or is this a normal occurrence? So to restart with those who say it's safeguarding concern, can you raise your hands? Okay. 13. Okay, I can see actually. So, someone changed the mind. Okay. We'll give you 10 more seconds, and then we'll go to those who do not think it's anything to worry about. Okay, so 14. So we have 14 people who think we need to raise safeguarding concerns, and anybody who thinks, oh, it's dropped to 13, or I think it was 14. Anybody who thinks there's nothing to worry about. Can everyone lower their hand first, and then can anyone who thinks there's nothing to worry about, can you raise your hands? So we've got 2 people. Okay, everyone shied away. Okay, so everyone who voted thinks we have to raise safeguarding concerns. the next picture, this is Prince Andrew. He's the son of the Queen of England. And this has all been in the media about how he's had issues with the late Mr. What's his name? Jeff Enston. I probably got it wrong, but he's pedophile friend. So this is Prince Andrew anyway. He's the son of the Queen of England. And this is a 17-year-old girl who years later, she's accused him of having inappropriate relationships with her while she was still 17 years old. So hands up those who think we have to raise safeguarding concerns. And I mean, this is obviously now no, but at the time, if you were dealing with Prince Andrew and having to, with this situation, who would be worried from a safeguarding point of view? Okay, so 9 people so far.
Somebody want to know how old is Prince Andrew, but from his face, I think it's more.
Prince Andrew is an adult. He was an adult at the time. I don't know how old he was, but he was an adult. As you can see, he's got a bit of gray hair, some stubbles. I think he was old enough. Okay, so that's 13 people. Okay, can we put down our hands, lower our hands, and anyone who thinks this is acceptable and it's okay to have this kind of relationship? Okay, 2 people. Okay, so 2 people, a few people have said, yes, it's okay. Okay, we'll move on to the next. This video, I don't know if anyone can hear it. Can anyone hear it? Can you hear you don't need to hear it anyway, but it just demonstrates a child. He's a toddler. He looks about 2, 3, I would say. He's in a village somewhere. He's carrying pieces of wood and probably helping out with household chores. So just thinking, hands up, anyone who thinks, forget about his dressing. Should I say forget about his dressing? Actually, just consider as a whole, you know, hands up, anyone who thinks this, you'd raise safeguarding concerns or you'd worry about child protection.
Children are mischievous. So did somebody send this child, or the child was just trying mischief?
So that's why I said I was trying to put the audio, but it wasn't working. The child is helping out, so he's doing household chores. It does sound like it does sound like there's someone around him who may be supervising him, but he is doing some household chores. Okay, so how many people? I can't. So 10 people think, yeah, we need to raise child safeguarding concerns. Someone's chicken out. Okay, fine. The next one. So we've got this toddler. She's a toddler. This is just, at least is more audible. Can everyone please lower their hands? So she's a child I follow up on. I like to follow her videos on Facebook because she cooks with her parents and does a lot of things. Her parents are also there in the background, just like the other child. So hands up, people who think we need to raise safeguarding concerns. So you can see she's got a pillar, a vegetable pillar, a few sharp objects. She's cooking. Like, let's see Dr. Muno raising concerns. So 6 people think we need to raise safeguarding concerns. Okay. Okay, thank you. And how many people, can I ask people to lower their hands? How many people think, oh, this is an okay thing to do? Like, you know, this toddler, she's cooking, she's supervised. Are we happy with this? Three people, 4 people, 5. So about splits. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, let's move on. Now, this is a toddler. This is her mom. Her mom left her in a flat. This is a true story, happened in the UK. So her mom left her in the flat and went off to celebrate her, I think it was her 20th or 21st birthday, left her, came back several days later, and she was dead. Can I ask everyone to please put down, everyone please lower your hand. And does anyone think there's a safeguarding concern here? So Toddler was left by herself in a flat. There was no adult looking after her, and mom went off to party. Thank you. That's the most votes we've had. Okay, I'm not going to check vote there on the other side. Excellent. So most of us think, yes, there's definitely a problem. And this is another story that happened. I can't remember if it was in the UK or the US. Can I please ask everyone to lower their hands, please? So this family, this mom is in trouble with social care, and is everyone able to see? So mom is in trouble with social care because she's asked her 14-year-old to look after the other children while she left to work in COVID. Normally she has childcare arrangements with the nursery, but because of COVID, she's unable to get that. So she left her 14-year-old to look after the other children. And while she went off to work, unfortunately, the mischievous toddler ran out, as toddlers always are, ran out to the neighbors and was caught and was found, and the police called. So are we worried from a child protection point of view? This mom, she had all her children taken, and everyone and went into lots of legal battles. How many people think I'm worried about these children? This mom is unable to protect her children, or there was something wrong that was done to these children? Okay, 5, 6. Just 10 more seconds, then I'll close the poll. Okay, 7, 8. Okay, so can I ask everyone to please lower their hands? How many people think I would do this? Like I'll be, you know, I don't see anything wrong with this. I would let my 14-year-old look after the other children while I'm gone off to work. Three people. People not being decided. Some people have decided to vote. Okay, that's fine. Right, we'll move on. I'll just ask everyone to lower their hands. Okay, so let's move on. Oops. Right, so safeguarding. So as you can see, safeguarding is a very, very complex topic. We're going to go through this outline. But the main reason I was asking, raising these questions was that sometimes it's difficult to pick up. There's no clear line between what is unsafe and what is right, what isn't. So we'll talk about safeguarding in the next few slides. Personally, I think it's okay to leave a 14-year-old to babysit if they're trained to do. You're able to contact them at regular intervals and things. If she were 10, supervising younger ones, then maybe would say something else. But anyway, so we'll go through this outline. I'm not going to go through in very much detail. What is safeguarding? Safeguarding generally is actions taken to promote the welfare of children and to protect them from harm. And this includes preventing harm to their development and health, protecting children from abuse, maltreatment, just generally ensuring that children grow up in a safe environment with the provision of safe and effective care, and taking action to enable that all children and young people have the best outcomes. So people tend to think of safeguarding as, oh, it's preventing children from harm. No, that's just one aspect of safeguarding children. It's just making sure that children grow the right way. Children are given or provided with all their needs, given all they need to survive, and are protected from harm. So that's a part of safeguarding. And according to the international human rights treaties and laws, all children have the right to be protected from harm. And whose responsibility is it? Everyone. And that's the main take-home message I'd like us to get from here. So safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. And now there are several types of abuse. And the one thing I'd like us to know about an abuser is that anyone, anywhere can be an abuser. It doesn't matter whether they're rich, poor, they're white, black, anyone can be an abuser. There are 4 main types of abuse we generally tend to talk about. So there's neglect, which is the most common type of abuse, which is where there's a failure to seek for example, like failure to provide food and shelter to your children, failure to seek medical care, say the children are sick and they come to the hospital late. So like I said, neglect is very common, even in the UK, in developed countries, in countries like Cameroon, which are developing countries. And sometimes there's a reason to explain why there's neglect, but it doesn't change the fact that it was neglect. You talk about emotional abuse, so bullying at home and bullying at school. Sometimes teachers bully children as well, children being exposed to domestic violence. And you also have physical abuse, where you have injuries, and that's a bit extreme. Sometimes the kind of abuse that tends to lead to death, like straight away, physical abuse. But neglect as well does lead to death, because if your child is poorly and you're unable to take them to hospital in a timely way, and they end up dying, so that that could be lethal. And then there's sexual abuse. And so there's some children who are at higher risk of abuse than others. So generally younger children, they're unable to talk. Children with disabilities, they're unable to talk as well. They have significantly higher needs. And so carers sometimes tend to get frustrated and lash them out at the children, or just unable to provide their needs, or they just have so many needs that the carers are unable to meet up with these needs. And so those are child factors, and other factors in carers. So you have like carers who have mental health problems, problems with substance misuse, poverty, lack of education, just cultural misconceptions, and the family factors, like families that are isolated from other people, like for example, refugee families. Sometimes we hear in the news of a family where, a refugee family who had moved, or an immigrant family, different culture, don't have too many friends, and they try to make their daughter get married to somebody, or they try to prevent their daughter going out with friends, and killed her because she was developing a Western lifestyle. Those kind of families could be more at higher risk of abuse. The children from those families with violence. So domestic violence is a well-known factor. It's a well-known phase of abuse. So that's a type of abuse as well. Or children who live in violent homes are more at risk of abuse from several methods. So you could be trying to hit the mom and you hit the child instead, or the dad could be upset. That's a bit sexist, sorry. So one parent could be upset and try to hit everybody. And we've heard of cases where the one parent gets upset and kills everyone, so that's really still abuse. Other factors, so communities with high rates of poverty, crime, and unstable housing, and generally victims of war and violence. And this is really the case in Cameroon at the moment, that we're having so many children at risk of safeguarding and abuse, because they are immigrant children, either refugee children from like the Central African Republic crisis, Boko Haram crisis, or even just from the Northwest and Southwest crisis, where they are they've moved to other places. So what is the scope of the problem? So abuse, like I said, happens everywhere and really has no face. So looking at this example, this is a couple in the US that was very upright in the public, in the community. They had so many children, and it was later discovered that they used to ill-treat their children extremely. So keep them chained, starve them, like extreme forms of physical violence, punishment. These children, when they were found, they were so malnourished, they were gaunt, almost dying. Think about this family. I don't know if people have heard about, I was quite fascinated about this family, because I kept thinking, how did this child go missed in the US for so long? So Gypsy Blanchard, she's a child who was a victim of abuse, and unfortunately had a sad ending that she ended up killing her mother, who was a perpetrator of abuse, and unfortunately went to jail for that. So her mother, through years of her life, made everyone to believe that she was paralyzed from her waist down, so she was wheelchair bound. Mother made everyone believe that she had cancer. She was on all sorts of medicines. She even had lots of surgeries that she didn't need. And when she revolted and killed her mom, she ended up going to jail. And so this was a case that really fascinated me. And talk about this sad case. So every day in the news, really, I see things like this kid that got killed by his parents. So it's quite common, and it doesn't happen only in the Western world. So I have a few on my feed every now and then, like I see things like this, and these are quite extreme forms. So these are the ones that we pick up. So this is a child, she was shared on Facebook, a child who was found locked up by his stepmother in a home. This happened somewhere in Cameroon. This is another picture of a mom in Cameroon. So she was punishing her 8-year-old daughter who had used her phone, something very benign, to use pepper to rub into her genitals and eyes and everything. So the point I'm trying to make is that abuse is general. It happens everywhere, and it has no color and no face. And children everywhere children are at risk of being abused. So regardless of the form of abuse, and unfortunately, people focus a lot on sexual abuse, but things like neglect, which are difficult to diagnose sometimes or pick up, and sometimes multifactorial. It's not just because the parents directly are unable to afford, it's a wider problem. Those kind of ones are not usually very easily picked up. So these are the statistics. So Canada, you talk about online bullying, cyberbullying. In the UK, when you have to get to take off a child from their parent or main caregiver into fostering or into the system, that's an extreme form. That's usually not the outcome that we want. And you think about female genital mutilation in Egypt, you think about rape, child sexual abuse. It's really widespread and it happens everywhere. And I found some really interesting and really concerning statistics. So think about Uganda, where 58% of girls report violence from their teachers, and about 27% of them, so that's 1 in 4, report being bullied. Bullying is quite common, and it could be more because these things are not reported. Think about South Africa. I was quite perplexed by this. So 1/3 of child murders occur at home, and 70% of girls under the age of 10 are victims of child murder. Take it round. So 70% of girls who are murdered are under the age of 10. And a good chunk of the perpetrators are their parents or their relatives. I really struggle to find statistics on Cameroon. I found the statistics that Elvis was mentioning, that 50% of girls, about half of children in Cameroon are at risk of being abused. But I was quite like, oh, that's a very significant figure. I also picked up this headline from a newspaper that said, at least 500,000 people have been abused in the Northwest. I think he was referring to sexual abuse, but it wasn't quite very specific. So what particular problems do the children face in Cameroon? When you try to look up statistics from Cameroon, the kind of things you see, so the right to identity, something as basic as that, not having birth certificates, that's a right to your welfare. More than 2 million Cameroonian children do not have birth certificates. The right to health, we have some of the highest mortality rates in the world. And yes, a lot of this is related to poverty, but a good chunk of it is neglect. And like I said, there are some reasons, there are many reasons, we can advance many reasons why these children get neglected, but the end point is that the fact that these children are dying so much results from neglect. And the neglect is not just from their parents, it could be from their parents, it could be from health caregivers, it could be from from school, it could be from anywhere really. Children in Cameroon have the right to education. We know that the government makes primary and secondary education free and even tertiary, but not every child is in primary school at least. I don't know what the law says, but generally in many countries, primary and secondary schooling is mandatory. But I don't know what the law says in Cameroon. And that's a really good way to pick out abuse. I'll talk about that a bit later. So think about exploitation and child labor. Almost half of children in Cameroon are working, doing some form of work. It's tricky to say, it could be good and bad, but when you put a child who's like 7 years old to go to the street to sell, moving around, hawking and selling, that's a very dangerous situation because that child's unable to protect themselves. That you're putting a child at risk of physical injury, at risk of sexual abuse and all sorts of things, and just the emotional trauma. People who argue that that's a growing phase. A child should be exposed to child activities, but they're doing what adults should be doing. Think about child marriage, and a lot. So it's very rampant. It's really settled in some cultures in Cameroon where more than 10% of girls marry. Overall, about 13% of girls marry under 15, and about 38% before 18 years old. And those statistics are really damning, and it's just a call for action, really. The other thing we worry about is female genital mutilation. Things like neglect, like those things are not things that really come out in the statistics from Cameroon. It's more things like sexual abuse. But what is the world doing about it? The first problem is that, are people really bothered by it? Like, almost all countries publish data on their GDP, but very few countries, less than, how many percent is that? Less than 25% publish data on child murder. Something that's quite extreme, talk less of child safeguarding. And the main problem with child abuse is that it's an invisible problem. Like I said, it can occur anywhere. I think I heard of a church in Cameroon where they had a Sunday school teacher who was abusing children. The church found out, and all they did was they prayed for him and led him back to the church. It can happen online. It can happen at home. Even in hospitals. There's recently in the UK, there was a nurse who's been convicted of killing patients on the neonatal unit. So not neonate, on the pediatric unit. She's a pediatric nurse and she was killing her patients. So it can happen even in the hospitals. And that's why when we find fractures in children who are hospitalized, it's a safeguarding report. That's a safeguarding report or safeguarding process that has to start. It's very difficult to identify sometimes, but and the people who are most at risk of abuse are the poorest, the most marginalized, and these are the ones who are offered the least protection. And so safeguarding problems, child abuse, they go largely undocumented and underreported, and it hides sometimes under guises of religion, culture, poverty. And these are the factors that just make it very difficult to pick. But then it has enormous consequences on children. So we know that children who have experienced emotional domestic violence causes long-term damage to their brain. But then children experience physical violence as well. And it makes them more likely to be violent. It can lead to their death in extreme cases. And it's not uncommon, like I said. And it just gets to be a vicious cycle of abuse where people who have abused tend to be abusers themselves, and they just have difficulties forming relationships, education, they suffer with their education. There's, like I said, increased risk of death, either directly or indirectly. And generally, it's the economy that suffers. So if we're losing children, we're losing our economy. There you go. So in the UK, we never talk about safeguarding without talking about the case of Victoria Klimde. So Victoria Klimde sadly died at 8 years of age. So she was brought in. It's just a case that emphasizes the importance of having appropriate safeguarding mechanisms and multi-agency working. So she was brought in from Ivory Coast in 2018 to live with her great auntie. We often do that in our culture. Her parents were really poor, struggling in the rural area in Ivory Coast, sent her to live with the family over. Throughout her miserable time in the UK, this child was known to 12 different agencies, and each of these agencies raised safeguarding concerns. So she'd been to the hospital for injuries, safeguarding concerns. People said, oh, this bruise looks suspicious. She had scabies. Oh, I think there's neglect here. Social care. Oh, she's not going to school. There are issues. She was, she was known to safeguarding teams, child protection teams, the church, the pastor. Her auntie managed to convince everyone that, oh, she's demon possessed, and she beats herself, bites herself, does all sorts of things. But the main problem, or the main reason why this child died, was because the agencies failed to communicate with each other. She'd been to the hospital several times with so many missed opportunities to save this child's life, but she ended up dying. And the cause of death, hypothermia. And underlying the hypothermia, that's low temperature. For those who are non-medics, she had 128 injuries on her body. She had severe malnutrition. And following the death of Victoria Klimde, that was in the year 2000, the UK had to revolutionize the way it looks at safeguarding. So in the past, we had child protection registers. Now they try to to create a kind of information sharing system in such a way that the information is linked. So if you're leaving one part of England to the other part, ideally, they should be able to communicate with each other. You can't abuse a child here. When you're under the radar, you move systems, and then you start trying to abuse a child again. So ideally, there should be that communication. It doesn't always happen, but those are the things. A lot of things. New laws came into place since then. The 2004 child protection laws came into place since the death of this child, because, like I said, every life matters. And I think it also highlighted the lack of training of staff who kept failing to recognize that this child was being abused, and those who managed to recognize failing to take action. So it leads us to the general questions: why do systems fail? I would like us to remember it is everyone's responsibility to keep children safe. And I'm not, without dwelling too much on this, there's the UN Convention on the Rights of Children that state that all parties, all states, the main responsibility of protecting children, safeguarding children, lies with the state. So it's the responsibility of the state really to have a framework of action that sort of keeps children in check, ideally. So this is a framework that we use for the UK, but I tried to see if I could get one for Cameroon. I couldn't really find one, but really, we want every child to be in the first phase. These are children whose needs are met. It doesn't always happen. And some children automatically, maybe children who have higher needs, children who are disabled, they have maybe a single mom. So the children are already at an increased risk of needing more support. But category 5, you see, is the most high risk level. We don't want children to get there. And the main issue with safeguarding is protecting children from harm, giving them their needs, preventing them from even getting to the worst phase. So to have a good system, what do we need? So we need to be able to have a system that understands the risks, the vulnerabilities, be able to provide strategic leadership, communication, developing professional capacity, so training and retraining the professionals. I have my safeguarding course. I think it's every 3 years or so that we professionals have to do. Everybody dealing with children has to be trained in safeguarding. And very important, we need multi-agency working to protect children. There's no perfect system, despite some systems being a bit more advanced in that sense. Some children still fall between the cracks. Last year, in the last few weeks, I kept seeing on my newsfeed children who've died in the UK from abuse from the hands of their parents. But we need to have these agencies working, and the various agencies, the main agencies we need to work together to help healthcare professionals, those in the community, those in the hospitals, safeguarding boards, the schools, the police, judiciary. If someone has been convicted of pedophilia, we should have a way of the community should be able to know this person should not work with children anymore. And the social care obviously is really in charge of coordinating all the agencies. And very importantly, the public. So like I said, the public is very important. Everybody has to look out for children. And so why do systems fail? Why do systems fail to protect children? Several reasons, starting at the individual level. So failure to recognize abuse. So in schools, hospitals, this is not specific to Cameroon, it happens everywhere. Some places are better than others, but it happens everywhere. So staff, lack of training, people are not aware, the staff don't feel empowered to raise concerns. And sometimes you're like, oh, this is a rich family, the fear of reputation, I'm going to damage my relationship with this family or with my boss who's going to be like, why are you raising these concerns? Lack of awareness of the pathways. So I have this concern, where do I go from here? I don't know. So I just don't bother about it. Failure to document. And that was really the case in the Victoria Kimberly case. So one of the consultants, she thought, oh, I'm worried about abuse in this child. And she verbally told her junior doctor, can you do the discharge letter? And the junior doctor did the discharge letter and did not include anything about abuse because it was not properly documented. And that's changed. At the moment, if I receive a child, because for suspect safeguarding, it's a whole pathway. It takes a lot of my time. I have to fill the forms, speak to the agencies. It just completely revolutionized how we work. at systemic level. So the lack of policies, lack of proper organizations of agencies, lack of multi-agency working between the agencies, lack of an appropriate mechanism to share information, and sometimes there's lack of appropriate funding for these mechanisms to even exist. And then there's also the lack of community awareness. And it's really important that all people dealing with children should feel accountable for child safeguarding, should be able to recognize children at risk of harm or abuse, should have a high index of suspicion for abuse, be able to recognize the pattern of injuries suspicious of intentional harm. Say, if a child comes to the hospital and with a fracture, toddlers run around, children, you know, they have all sorts of, they're very dangerous. Toddlers are very dangerous. Is this an injury I should worry about? If a toddler comes with a burn in the buttocks, why is this toddler having a burn in the buttocks? I need to think a bit more. If this toddler, this baby, an infant, is unable to move and has a fracture of the femur, that's the big bone in the leg. Why is this toddler this child cannot move and has a fracture in the femur? I have to think more. So we have to have those policies in place to be able to say, okay, you know, I think this might be abuse. And the moment you have a suspicion, you should not let it die. You should be able to have those mechanisms in place to raise awareness, to report it to somebody, to investigate, and to protect that child from harm. And everyone should feel empowered to be able to do this. UNICEF has six strategies to end child abuse. So first, to support parents, caregivers, and families. And these are strategies that they encourage communities, governments, agencies to adopt. So secondly, to help children manage the risk they face. So for example, educating our girl children on sexual abuse, teaching them how to, you know, stay away from strangers. We do that personally, usually as parents. And then changing attitudes and social norms that encourage violence, promoting and providing support and services for children, implementing laws and policies that protect them. Sorry, when I looked at the Cameroonian laws, I couldn't really see anything recent on child protection or child safeguarding, but obviously Joyce is going to tell us more about that, and encouraging agencies to carry out data, collect data, and do more research. And the last question I'm going to ask people is child abuse cultural? Hands up if you think yes. So if people are still listening, do you think child abuse is cultural? Okay, so 4 people, 10 seconds, I'll close the poll. So 4 people, so if you, hands up if you think child abuse is cultural. Do you think it's a cultural thing? Like some cultures, yeah, it's a culture, we can let it pass. Or do you think no? So 5 people. So how many people think child abuse is not cultural? Abuse is abuse. It is what it is. How many people? So the greater majority. Okay, thank you for that. That warms my heart. And no, child abuse is not cultural. Child abuse is child abuse. And this is something I've had to reflect on, I've had to think about. You go by the laws of the country, but children everywhere. So if England says at 16, children are allowed to marry with the consent of their parent, okay, they can get married from 16. If Cameroon says it's 15, that's the law of Cameroon. But child abuse is child abuse. Child abuse is not cultural, and we have to take action and we have to end it. A few references, if anyone is interested, there's a very good UNICEF document, a second reference on child abuse. I was very impressed when I read it. And the last message I want to share is that every child is worth fighting for. And thanks for listening.
Wow, thank you so much. This is a very exciting and a very wonderful first part of the presentation. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone in the town hall is learning a lot. And of course, Therese, you want to take a temperature of the house?
Hi. Oh, yeah, that was a real good conversation and a good presentation, Judwin. Kudos to you. And I learned a lot. Maybe I've been abusing my children without knowing, but we're gonna talk more about it.
Bullying at home.
Yeah, so after the first presentation, I've been abusing. I've been abusing my kid without knowing. So great presentation. And I just feel like there's a lot of people that have joined us today for this town hall. And without wasting our time and everything, I think we should go to the second part of it. So we'll have enough time to discuss, like, I have a number of boiling questions. I have a number of things to ask about because I think I've been abusing my kid. So I think we can go over to Joyce. Elvis, can you?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy my 5-year-old did not listen to the presentation, else I would not shout again at home. Okay, let's get to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be among all of you. In fact, I'm overwhelmed, but I'm happy that I'm among my brothers and sisters and that we have common interests, even though we're in different areas of practice. But it shows you how interconnected we all are. And when we talk about children's rights, it's particularly important because they are vulnerable, but they are also the future of tomorrow. So how we treat them today is definitely going to be a reflection of what our society would be tomorrow. That is why children's rights is very, very important. Okay, so Judwin has spoken a lot about what safeguarding is, right? And just for reflection again,
you want to put your slide on the presenter mode just so we can get more space on your screen to see?
Okay, that's going to be hard.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find that.
Yeah, just well, but we are comfortable. You can go ahead. No worries. But...
I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that.
Okay, no, that's fine. But we can see your slide. I hope everyone can see the slide.
I hope everyone can see my slide because there's a lot of text, but
at the bottom right of your screen, bottom right of your screen, before the bar that you can enlarge, just click on that bottom right.
Oh, they say F. Somebody said F5 must work. May work. You know, we have a lot of IT.
Okay, let me try.
F5 is easy. IT people.
My remote has gone to the top of my screen. So am I supposed to click on more and?
Okay, then we can just go.
So on the bottom right, there is an icon just you know, right at the left of that.
I can see a mouse just beside the mouse.
Your mouse is just by that icon. Your mouse is in the middle. Go towards the
like
left.
An umbrella.
So just on the
left.
left.
Towards the left.
This one?
On the left.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, beautiful.
Okay, now how do I move to the next slide? Okay, I just scroll down. Okay, thank you guys very much. That is a good IT lesson I learned. Okay, so this is where we were. This is what safeguarding is, right? Judwin has talked a lot about this, but what is safeguarding in Cameroon? You know, in I'm trying to remove this. Excuse me, I want to close the chat. I'm sorry. In Cameroon, right, the word that is used in context is usually child protection. And it is used to mean including both safeguarding and protection. When you read what the Ministry of Social Affairs says on its website or in their manifesto, it brings together both issues of safeguarding and child protection. Safeguarding, as Judith explained earlier, which is a preventive action to keep children from harm, versus child protection, which is distinct, though very related to safeguarding. Child protection is what we do to respond to harm. So a child who has been a victim of, say, child abuse or rape, how do we respond to that rape? That is the difference. But in the Cameroonian context, there's kind of both words used interchangeably. And the concept that is very commonly used is child protection, right? So you would hear me talk a lot about child protection, but that's also largely because, in my opinion, safeguarding is almost absent. You wouldn't find proactive actions or measures put in place to prevent the harm, but we have adequate information about protection, right? So why is safeguarding and protecting important? Because we talk of the rights of the child, and the rights of the child is basically human rights for children. And that is why it is a legal issue, because if the law does not recognize it, it does not exist. You cannot claim it until the law recognizes it. So I'll give a brief background of why the rights of children is important. After the Second World War, that was the most horrible war ever fought in human history, and the Holocaust. After the Second World War, there was a multiple of, that's when human rights actually came into the limelight with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with all the international charters for civil and political rights in the 60s and going forward. But there were still growing concerns because of a lot of the displacement that resulted from the war, the Cold War that was ongoing. Children were still not paid particular attention to. So the the Convention on Children's Rights came up in 1989. Until date, it is the most widely ratified international treaty. Cameroon, also being a member of the African Union, also joined the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child in 1997. These are the mother documents, international human rights law that protect and guarantee the rights of children around the world. And it applies to children all over the world, regardless of any form of discrimination on grounds of sex, culture, language, whatever. As long as you're a child under 18, then that law applies. And the Convention on Rights of the Child has 3 optional protocols. Cameroon had signed 2, but you'll be shocked that the protocol on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography was only ratified by Cameroon in 2020. Why is that important? That means you could not report, or Cameroon did not have effective mechanisms to combat those crimes because it was not a party to that treaty. And if the law in Cameroon does not provide for that, for protection against that crime, you cannot then rely on international treaty to have that right protected. We also have other treaties that also concern human rights. So children's rights protection in Cameroon, international labor organization has Convention number 138 that sanctions child labor, and the protocol against elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and the protocol to punish human trafficking and smuggling. But these are international treaties, right? And what you should understand international treaties is they are in the international milieu. How did they come down to be applied by you and I in our local societies? That is how the law is translated from international to national by our constitution. Article 45 of our constitution permits direct application of the laws, international treaties that have been ratified by Cameroon. So if there's a conflict of laws, if there is an absence of a law, there is a provision in the international treaty, because Cameroon has signed that law, Cameroon becomes bound by the terms of that treaty. That's what Article 45 does for us. And Article 45, our constitution is the major law that governs the country and gives birth to all the other laws and systems and whatever that exists in the country. Our preamble also makes allusions to all of these international human rights treaties and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So if you read our constitution, which was amended in 2008, it says that every human being, without distinction of race, religion, sex, or creed, possesses sacred inalienable rights. Every human being would include children, and some people would argue the fetus, which is still an argument which goes on in many intellectual milieus, but in Cameroon, the fetus is considered a human being. But upon birth, every human being, including children. And we have other internal laws like the civil code, the penal code, adoption laws, labor laws. Cameroon is very I'm always embarrassed to say this, Cameroon has very amazing texts. They have many amazing laws. They would write them in such beautiful language, and you would read them and be amazed at how vast and how far they cover certain issues. So when we talk about children's rights, it's not in isolation. It would be reflected in how we, for example, in the legal system, how do we treat children? How do we prosecute them in cases where children are part of an offense? Are they given special treatment if they have to be arrested waiting trial? Would they mix them up with adults? Would they be punished the same way, the same severity as adults? Or are they given some kind of reformational or rehabilitational punishments or sentences? So when we talk about labor, children are allowed to work. Children doing house chores under supervision shouldn't be an issue. But when we look at our environment and we see how children work, are they being employed with their consent, number one? Are they being treated right? Are they being paid adequately? Are they given jobs to do that are equivalent to their ability and their physical capability and mental capability? Or are they just, tasked to do work because, we need outcome, we need output, we need money? Are they paid equally for their wages, for their labor, or are they, exploited? I know here in the US, as from age 14, kids are allowed to work, but a 14-year-old has limited hours of work. And the work environment must be conducive to that child. They're not allowed to work in certain milieus, and likewise, they're not allowed to work for certain hours. They must be at school. They could have part-time jobs with 2 to 3 or 4 hours maximum at any job they do. We have that transcribed in our labor laws. So we have many areas where we have to look to make sure that children's rights are reflected in every single step of society. Okay, so we have these internal laws. And in Cameroon, the two major actors in safeguarding and protection, you have the Ministry of Social Affairs, which is responsible for the development and implementation of government policy on prevention, assistance, and protection of vulnerable people. Their services are for the benefit of the vulnerable people, indigenous people, elderly persons, children, persons with disabilities, and socially vulnerable persons. That would include like the internally displaced people that we have right now. The Ministry of Social Affairs is based in Yaoundé. It has delegations at the regional and at the divisional levels. It also runs the technical and operational units, such as welfare services. It has certain programs for rehabilitating kids. It has a program for street children. It has, I think, a 40, an orphanage that can take up to 40 people in like 3 different parts of, forgive me, in like 3 different parts of the country. So we also have the Cameroon National Commission of Human Rights and Freedom, which is the main enforcement mechanism of violations of human rights in the entire country. And it's, however, not very independent. And it's unfortunate that you can have a Human Rights Commission where the leadership is appointed by presidential decree, and they cannot verify their independence and autonomy from the government. So we know that mostly in other human rights issues, the government is usually the main perpetrator, but that is what makes abuse against children very peculiar, because it is those that are closest to them who are the abusers. When we talk of women's rights, we talk of the rights against torture, protection against torture. The person we're looking at as the perpetrator usually is the state refusing to recognize a right, refusing to treat women as equals, refusing to make resources available for women and things like that. But when it comes to children, what makes it all the more scary is that the people whom you trust these children to, the people who are supposed to protect these vulnerable ones, are likely the perpetrators. And most times you see that it comes from a place of good. They think they're doing what is best for the child. It's discipline, it's tough love, but it's, as we've seen, it's abuse. Okay, so the Ministry of Social Affairs works with all children, right? But they focus mostly on vulnerable children, whom they define as children who are unable to enjoy all of their human rights due to poverty, not being registered at birth, emergency situations, neglect, abandonment, violence, abuse, trafficking, exploitation. No, I'm sorry. What I was trying to say that the ministry focuses on vulnerable children, and the children who fall into this category are usually children who, by virtue of the circumstances of their birth and immediate environment, are unable to meet their basic needs. This would include children who are born in the rural areas. This would include children who are born to parents who maybe are sick with HIV and AIDS and they die shortly after birth and the children are orphaned. This would include children who are in emergency situations like the thousands we have today who are displaced due to the conflict in the north and in the northwest and southwest regions. So some people are born in such extreme poverty that by no fault of theirs are unable to fully enjoy their human rights. We have that in some areas in Cameroon, we're very well aware that some people have access to water and better education because we're born maybe in Yaoundé or in Bamenda or in an area where, you know, these amenities are readily available. But there's a child who was born somewhere in Ka, somewhere in Sibongari, who just by virtue of his birth does not even have a bench to sit in at school. We've seen pictures of children who attend class under trees, who have to build sheds to sit in, to learn, and who write on plank boards because there's no pen, there's no chalk, they use school to write. It's just by virtue of their birth, place of birth, and no fault of theirs. So the Ministry of Social Affairs kind of focuses most of its activities towards these children. And also another group of children whom are also raising concern in Cameroon, which are the Cameroon, they call them the street children. There's a project that usually goes on every year to see how they can get these children off the streets, go to school, and maybe go reunite them with their parents. Okay, Cameroon has particular challenges when it comes to the country itself. We have the issue of the right to health. Even though it is provided in our legal documents, in the framework, the Ministry of Health is there trying to implement what it knows how to do best, to provide hospitals, yet we still have increased child mortality, a high rate of child mortality in Cameroon. Education is also one of the basic rights that the Cameroon government has tried to make available to its communities, to its society by promising free elementary education to all children, right? So this would definitely affect children between ages, let's say 3 to 14. You're all expected to, within that age range, to be in elementary school. But is this goal really, sometimes I stutter because I don't know what to say, that is education actually free? They may be the element of no, but there's no school fees. There's no school fees requirement for public schools. But then on the other hand, you have high PCH dues, which you must pay before you attend school, right? There's another issue where the material is not there. You know, children have to pay for textbooks. If you don't buy a textbook, you cannot come to my class and you're just out of class. And they don't provide even the poor and the vulnerable with material to help them study. And some of them who can even afford the schools and everything don't have electricity at home to do assignments. They don't have water at home. It's hard to isolate an issue and deal with it without having to go through all the other strata of society to see how deeply flawed our protection and safeguarding systems are. actually. So Cameroon's right to education somehow seems good because it has, however, contributed to a high literacy rate. But on the other hand, it is creating high unemployment rate because all of these people who go to school and get out of school are unable to secure jobs. So another issue which comes to mind in Cameroon is the right to identity. It is a human right that everybody must be identified. Everybody must have a birth certificate because it is through this document that you're able to be identified and to have access to many services and social welfare as well. So upon birth, every child should be registered. And the parent has within 90 days after birth to register the child for free. But we know how people would usually be, oh, I cannot do this right now, or you procrastinate until after 9 months, and then you see that now you have to pay about 4,500 francs if you're lucky to get a supplementary judgment, what we call the declaration judgment, to get a birth certificate. What this does is that some people who cannot afford that just ignore it, right? So you have children who wait until when it's time for enrollment or to write the GCE, and they start looking for a birth certificate. And now with the increase in the insecurity with the COVID, it's made matters of registration even worse. Sometimes some people have to travel long distances from their location to go to the next village to register a birth. And they'll just be like, oh, whatever. When the child grows up, they will figure it out themselves. And you have children, about 2 million, who do not have birth certificates. And without that document, how do they obtain education, healthcare, or other public services? How do they even identify as Cameroonians? One of the main issues that we face in Cameroon when it comes to abuse is exploitation and child labor. We know that most of our children or young people in Cameroon are under 18. Some of them will go to school and be like, I don't like school, I don't want to go to school anymore. And they immediately start to learn a trade. So we have children who are underage doing very menial jobs. We have children who are employed in plantations, in farms. We have children who are involved in production of cocoa, cotton, onions, tea, like workers. We have children, and the most common part of it is that most children work as domestic servants. That is the worst form of exploitation we have going on in Cameroon right now, because we have a culture-based approach towards assisting each other, I could put that way. Parents who are not able to take care of their children would send their child to live with a family member who is perhaps better placed to take care of that child. And soon the child is turned into a domestic servant, or the child is turned to hawking in the streets. And even the parents of their own children who are unable to make ends meet have the tendency to put their children on the streets to hawk. And this exposes these children as well to a lot of abuse. I know of one case that happened right in front of me, where a lady was selling food and would always send her child to go and give a particular customer his lunch. And each time that child went there, she got raped. This was a very senior government official who did this to this child. The child was about 15 years old. And in Cameroon, 15 years old girls, you know, sometimes they're the ones who even run their mother's shops. That happens a lot. You put your children out there to help. And besides the fact that you're exploiting them for labor, you're also exposing them to other forms of abuse. So we always attribute this forced labor to economic factors, there's fluctuating income, the father becomes sick or loses his job, some other has to step up to the plate, but still, that is exploitation. And there are rules in place that govern child labor, that the children should not work in any hazardous environment. They may think it's okay for a child to go to a farm, but if you're using hazardous material, say a pesticide spray, that makes that environment unsafe for the child. And then you are in violation of the child's rights. You affect the child's health because you're exposing him to poisonous gases. We also have the alarming issue of child marriage, where in Cameroon, girls above 18 continue to be married. And it is even more alarming that it's until recently that girls were given the same age of majority as boys. Previously, a girl at age 15 could marry legally, whereas a boy had to wait for their 18th birthday. That is another form of discrimination, but that is what exposed girls to marry younger than their counterparts because of their sexes. And we still have this prevalent rate in Cameroon where girls are forced into marriages, maybe for economic reasons, because the parents cannot afford to keep the girl for longer, or maybe because the parents are hoping to get a bigger gift or bride price payment that will help the set of the family. Okay, we also have the female genital mutilation issue, which Judwin mentioned. FGM is still very rampant in Cameroon. I think I omitted that from one of my slides, right? So we have FGM that is practiced in the north by mostly the area around Kuseri, and in the southwest around the Manu region. Those are the areas where we have a lot of girls experiencing or undergoing FGM. We also have the idea of breast ironing, which is very rampant in the littoral area. So Cameroon has particular issues that are needing a lot of attention, but they have mechanisms in place for protection in the texts, because I have lived in Cameroon for most of my life, and I have worked with social services, I have worked with women, I have worked with children, but the problem with safeguarding and protection is if we do not have the resources and the infrastructure, all the laws we put there are just window dressing. Because in real fact, if we do not have resources, let's take, for example, we talked about birth certificates. All of our birth certificates are still written by hand. There is no registry of or central database for collection of birth certificates or registration of births, marriages, and deaths. So how do you carry out a proper background check on an individual before allowing this individual to come in contact with children? The most common requirement you would see is the request for a certificate of non-conviction. But who would take their time to go through records dating back from perhaps 1981 in a certain area, let's say Bamenda, that has more than 1 million people, to go manually to cross-check every legal document or judgment or court decision to find out whether this person has ever had a criminal or a case made against him for child abuse related issues. It's impossible without that kind of infrastructure to ask for a proper background check. What happens in Cameroon is we go to the legal department and pay 1,500, get somebody to sign the document and give it to you without actually verifying this against the data that we have. Without the infrastructure, how do you remove the child who is being abused, who is being beaten, like the child we saw who was tied up in chains? I saw another horrid video of a child whose stepfather submerges him under water for punishment. How do you save that child? So in your good faith, you see it and you have to report it. You report to the Ministry of Social Welfare. They have 3 orphanages, 40 beds in each of them. We have more of civil society that offers support to the community than we have government agencies working to provide these infrastructures. And even the civil societies are handicapped. So how do you report this child and get the child to be removed when you know that there's nowhere that this child will be placed? The child remains stuck with their abuser. How do you help a child to access healthcare when the closest health clinic or the closest clinic is about 3 or 4 kilometers away? If the child, for example, has malaria or diarrhea, How did I get to that clinic? By foot, with no roads. It is a little traumatic that in the 21st century, we talk about certain things like the cholera outbreak in Cameroon. And there's nothing that is being done or effectively can be done in the shortest space to address or to reverse this pandemic. So when I was thinking about talking about this, this safeguarding, I was wondering if I should be talking about the absence of it, rather than how it obtains in Cameroon, because after reading and reflecting on my experiences and talking with a few people I know back home, it is a terrible situation that there are no preventive measures in place by either the government or establishments that come in contact with children to ensure that they protect, they can guarantee the safety of these children while they're in their care. There was a video that came out last week of a teacher who beat up a child in class. It was the most shocking thing I'd ever seen. It's common knowledge that parents would put pepper in their children's eyes and private parts because perhaps the child is promiscuous. It's just a form of discipline. We grew up seeing parents taking their children to the police to be beaten up by the police and locked up as corrective measures. So at a certain point, we have become too complacent, we've become too exposed and familiar with abuse that it's become normal, that we either do not know how to report it, how to identify it, because it's normal, it's just discipline, versus us. And even if you found out that it was abuse and you go to report it, then what? So it comes to the point where we have to sit down as a community to think about what matters to us the most. There was the slide which Dr. Judwin shared, which broke my heart the most, where she said that most countries report their GDPs, but the data on children neglect, children abuse, children's harm is absent. And if we have the infrastructure in place, it makes this all the more easier to start to talk about safeguarding children and then protecting children. Like I said earlier, the Cameroon approach emphasis has been laid a lot more on protection. But what safeguarding does is that it even prevents the harm from occurring in the first place. That is where the emphasis should be. How do I make sure that my daughter's teacher is not a child molester, it's not a pedophile? How do I make sure that my son is not going to be raped by his nanny? How do I make sure that my daughter is at school, she will not be physically harmed as a form of punishment by her teacher? There's an absence of policies and procedures that ensure that those who come in contact with children are properly trained, are vetted, know how to identify, how to recognize, how to prevent harm from occurring. But that's where we're missing the most in Cameroon. So I was coming up with recommendations. And let me go back to this slide. There are a few facts to consider. I wonder if we are all aware that Cameroon is has a very young population. This statistic says that, this is from the Cameroon Household Survey. Out of every 2 Cameroonians, 1 is less than 18 years. But there's another survey that says that more than 75% of the country is under 45. It's a very young population. And 40% of the population live in poverty. The net enrollment rate in school is 22% in preschool, 80% of primary, and 38% of secondary. And the dropout rate is 44%. 89% of urban population has access to drinking water against 49% in rural areas. And there's a malnutrition rate of 32% in children under 5. 30% of births of children under 5 is not recorded. 27% of children aged 5 to 17 years are compelled to labor. That should be abolished. And only 16% of identified orphan and vulnerable children receive care. I must also comment that when I was reading this and I went into the procedures for adoption in Cameroon, which I had never taken time to explore, it's the most stringent I have come across so far. That even if you saw these vulnerable children and wanted to adopt these children, you would have to have been married and been married for up to 15 years before you're qualified to adopt a child. If you're single, it's even easier for you. But for a married couple, you have to show 15 years of marriage. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I was going to come up with recommendations. And I thought that maybe this would be a moment where we can have an interactive session and see how we can come together as experts in our respective fields to suggest action plans that can be taken at individual level or recommendations we can make to the government to help us to combat child abuse. Thank you so much. And I don't know what the method is after this, but
thank you.
This is where I would end.
And thank you for this great presentation. Right after Judwin's presentation, we had questions burning already. So people are burning with questions for both Joyce and Judwin. And this is promising to be, really, really exciting. Before we dive into the question session, I think I'm just going to check with a few people to see how they're finding today's session. And I'm going to call on Nora Mbinglo. Hi, Nora. Are you with us?
Sure, I am. Hi, everyone.
Welcome, welcome. How are you finding today's session?
Unfortunately, I actually joined very late, so I didn't get to catch up from the beginning.
Okay. Great, and thanks for that honest feedback. But from what you've picked up so far, do you have any particular thoughts that just come to mind? Nora, are you still with us? Okay, maybe while Nora is reflecting on what stood out for her, I'm going to call on Mr. Sam Fonte. Hi, Mr. Fonte. Okay, we do have more people joining back. All right. Maybe we'll just give another minute for people to trickle back in. And everyone who's just joining us back, welcome back, and sorry for the technical challenges. We don't know what happened, but for some reason, Zoom just decided it wasn't happy on a Saturday. Maybe while Nora and Mr. Fonte are still thinking, I'm going to call on Adeline Fonte. Hi, Adeline. Is Adeline with us? Okay, maybe Adeline is still thinking. The last attempt is going to be with Mommy Judith Fonte. Hi, Mommy Judith, how are you today? Mrs. Judith Fonte, are you with us? If you're with us and if you can hear me, please kindly unmute yourself. All right. Eventually, people whose names have been called, you could always just share any thoughts that come to mind. But I think we're going to dive right into the question and answer session because There are a lot of questions that are coming up already. People have been burning with questions, but I'm going to begin with the first one for both Judwin and Joyce. So there are two concepts that personally I've come across and that are very frequently mentioned. One of them is what you call cultural relativism. And cultural relativism argues that, you know, if you go into a person's context, you are expected to look at their cultural beliefs and practices from a way that says, okay, I appreciate these cultural beliefs and practices, versus I'm coming to come and judge them and tell the people what is the right thing to do. And cultural ethnocentrism is the concept that says, you know, it's the tendency to look at the world primarily from the perspective of one's own culture. And it is the belief that one's own race, ethnic or cultural group is the most important among all. So cultural relativism and cultural ethnocentrism are kind of opposing concepts. So a lot of people in the African context, or context where child marriages and all that, some of these practices are allowed, they argue that having a girl get married at 15 is completely fine. And the whole concept of waiting for that girl to get to 21 is the white man's way of doing things. That is the white man's way of doing things, and that the white man should not come to our context and tell us what should be acceptable in our own context. So they can push back and say, well, I can marry a teenage girl and that's fine by me because our culture accepts it. Why should someone come from a different context and feel that what they are doing, the standards they have in their own system, are superior, and hence I have to abide by it? What are your thoughts around things like child marriage when it comes to some contexts which might allow it at an earlier age versus at a later age, with regards to this whole issue around what is culturally acceptable and what is not in different settings?
So maybe Judith wants to go first.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question, Alison. I think it's a very sensitive topic, and as you say, I think when people make these laws and things, we want to be careful that we don't tread on people's culture. The question I will ask, if there's an obstetrician in the house, is there any obstetrician in the house? I think I saw Dr. Oaks, Dr. Mbako Kingsley. Well, the question I will ask, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the reason that we put these laws to say girls should not get married before 18 years of age? And the reason is that before 18 years of age, their reproductive system is still developing. They are at a significantly higher risk of complications of childbirth. Long and short, it is not safe for girls to get married at the age of 18. I always said, when I worked in Garabulai, there was a baby that came in with a severe hot water burn to its tummy. And I was told that the mom had poured hot water on its tummy because they told her that's how to make the umbilical stump get healed quickly. And I was so upset. And I was like, where is this mother? And it was a 13-year-old girl walked into the room. I just calmed down and just quietly went about my job. Like, how would I even start? She's a child, she's 13. That was her understanding. What is her appreciation? Is she able to really look after a newborn baby and all the challenges that come with that? And what we know from a medical point of view is that children who give birth as children are more at risk of having birth complications. Children who belong to child mothers are also more at risk of, one, their own health being neglected. And so their life expectancy is higher mortality, all leads to higher mortality. That's overall. So that's the question we have to ask ourselves when we think, oh, is the culture of this place, you know, and why shouldn't it be allowed? Because it's the culture. Sorry, just one moment.
Thank
you. Yeah, sorry about that. So, and in addition to that, so but the problem is, yes, we have to acknowledge that it's a problem. It's an issue. It's putting the child's life at risk. both the baby and the mother, it's putting their lives at risk. And most of these children, if you think about from a wider point perspective, education-wise, and most of these children, it's against their will. They're not getting married because they want to. They are made to get married at that age. It's not right. So, but I think the wider question is, how do we trot it? How do we approach the problem? It's not about going to say, I'm going to arrest all the dads in Northern Cameroon or Far North because of this, this is what's happening. It's about community engagement, making the community understand why it's a problem and getting it from that angle. I'll let Joyce take over.
Okay, that's a very apt response, especially given the context we're talking about. This argument of cultural relativism is one that is widely used, especially by third world Asian countries, to argue against certain human rights. And I must also say that there is a lot of good reason to that argument, because human rights seems to have, I too think that human rights for the most part was never for the Africans. Human rights was coined for the white people. Because one question I'd asked once was, if human rights was for everybody, was universal, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the international conventions were ratified 1948, 1960s, then why did African countries have to fight for independence still, if we're all equal and free and all of that? So just to show you that the argument has a lot of credence. It is true that everyone's culture is their culture, but we must admit that even in culture, there are certain things that are repugnant to natural justice. And what human rights does is to guarantee dignity of the human being. Nobody is going to say that, oh, your child should wear jeans, or my child cannot wear the hijab. There are still arguments of the sort. But the point is, when we talk of rights and legal issues, these rights cut across. As long as your country has acceded to the treaty, it would apply regardless of culture. That is what makes it universal. That's what makes it a human right. The way it is applied, therefore, is going to have to be tailored towards the country's own culture. For example, it is normal that you have treaties that are signed, but a country would enter a reservation to a particular clause. I would accept this treaty with the exception of this particular clause. It will not apply to me because of my culture, because of my religion, because of this. But most parties to treaties would agree on the important issues that the treaty is trying to address. So for the particular case you mentioned on child marriage, like Judwin said earlier, Dr. Judwin said earlier, most of these children are forced into it. And the thing that safeguarding is supposed to do is to say that children should be able to make informed decisions. That's one of the key things that safeguarding does. Is this child informed that she's giving up her childhood, that she's risking herself to spend the rest of her life with somebody she may not love, or somebody who is going to turn her off every time he touches her, or that she's going to have a troublesome pregnancy, or she may actually die when having a baby. So all of these things must be taken into consideration, and that is why safeguarding is important, so that we can teach children to make informed decisions. And in Cameroon in particular, a girl child can marry legally at 15, but the boy child at 18. At 15, they still need parental consent though, but it's legally permissible.
Thank you for these responses. And we do have a few hands up, but before we take other questions, this question goes, I think, primarily to you, Barrister Nyamboli. When do you think it's important to use the legal route when it comes to some of these things versus dialogue? And I'm going to paint a picture as to why this question is coming up. So last week, there is this program on social media called Enquête Exclusive, which showed the story of this girl somewhere in Congo. And she's a teenager married to an old man. And she is clearly saying she wants to go back to school. she doesn't love this old man, and she wishes she was with a younger person. And this program, goes to ask, okay, how did you find yourself in this situation? And the old man she's married to looks like a man in his 70s. And I'm just going to drop the link in the chat for those who are interested in listening to this, watching it. She is saying that the bride price was paid to her grandfather. And when the grandfather was interviewed, he says that the man who married his daughter raped the daughter. So she was raped by this older man. And in their culture, when you've been raped, you have to, when you've been disvirgined by a man, you have to be given up as a wife to this man. So there are a couple of things that come out in this story. It's being shown, on social media like this, but one, this girl was raped by this older man. Two, she was given out in marriage as a child. When do you think that dialogue in some of these contexts should be used as a strategy? And when do you think that the law absolutely needs to come in?
Long and short, the law has to come in at every point, because that is how we're going to change. That is one of the things that culture does. Culture would allow a wrong to be repaired by another wrong. It's but natural in our culture that you want your child to marry as a virgin. In the case this child is molested, and you'll be surprised that even the Cameroon Penal Code at one point said that rape can be cured if the person marries the girl. It was in our penal system up till 2016 when the code was amended. So if there's rape and eventually the couple get married, then on many legal reasons, for example, you cannot be forced to testify against your spouse, then people would always encourage marriage. There are a few cases where the person who raped the victim has fallen in love with their rapist and they decide to marry, but that's a different story. Here you see that it's a setting and a culture where a girl is forced to marry someone she does not like because he raped her. Do you know what it means to spend the rest of your life staring at the man who raped you? And you don't like the man, but you're obliged to because culture prescribes it. In my opinion, the law should come in at the very start. That man is a rapist. He should be removed far from the girl. The grandfather is a trafficker or whatever suitable thing I would call him, because in exchange for bride price, you would give up your child to marry against her will. The law should always have priorities, but you'll be surprised how, because of economic reasons again, families prefer to resort to dialogue because this man may be the head of the family. We've had cases in Cameroon where a father rapes his own child. The mother is aware but cannot report because the father is the main breadwinner. If the father is locked up, the rest of the family goes destitute. We've had cases where they would come and propose compensation to a very poor family. The story I told you about earlier, this little girl went to serve food to a regular customer who raped her and offered them a lot of money. Selling food for 10 years would not have given that kind of money. Is it the child's dignity or the family's financial welfare that the mother would choose? So economic reasons is also a big issue when it comes to resorting to the law or dialogue. And most times, unfortunately, the economic reasons trump.
Thank you for your responses. Brian, please take it away.
Thanks, Alison, and thanks a lot, Joyce, for that really great presentation. I just wanted to really follow up on this subject of cultural relativism. You mentioned that the CRC, I think the United Nations CRC, was initially adopted in, I think you said the early 1990s and 1989, okay, and then ratified by the African Union later on. I think just based on the story that Alison just shared, it looks like the DRC is one of those African Union member states that haven't ratified the that particular treaty, are we seeing like an increased incidence of these kinds of events in countries that have not ratified the agreement on the African Charter? That's the first question. But the second question is, when Cameroon did, in one of your slides, you did share that Cameroon ratified the African Charter on children's rights. Does that override? Does that override what's in the CRC? I understand the African Charter sort of was adopted based on what you presented, was adopted to take into account the sociocultural differences that do exist. Like what might be happening in Europe might not be applicable to, or in other countries might not be applicable in our African context. And the whole goal of it was to ensure that we do take into context the realities, the economic and sociocultural realities in our own context. But when an individual country, for instance, in Africa, chooses to ratify this, does that override every other existing international treaty, or how is that really dealt with?
Okay, the CRC is a charter that was drawn up by the United Nations. The United Nations is a universal body. The African Union is a regional. So in most affairs of international relations, what the universal body does, like the UN, would apply universally. But then you have other regional blocks. You have the European Union, the African Union, there's the Asian, and there's something in the Middle East, I don't remember, and you have the North American. So these bodies, because they have common traits, common issues that are particular to them, they would always go back with the issue that is being discussed at a universal level to customize it to suit their context. And the states usually subscribe to both. For example, Cameroon has ratified the CRC as well as the African Charter on the Children's Right and Welfare. And why did the Africans find a need to create their own charter? Because the CRC did not take into context the African culture, which is solidarity and family, the tightly knit community and family. So you see that in the CRC, for example, adoption is considered to be between, look at it in the West. I may not be married and may not have children. I go to an orphanage and adopt a child, right? This is an argument that we use a lot in court. Adoption would seem to mean that it's for people who are unable to have children in the Western world. Whereas in our African culture, when a woman is going into marriage, she brings a child who becomes the first child of that family. There's hardly a requirement for someone in an adopted child to show proof of adoption into a family by adoption certificate. Does not mean that you are not adopted into that family. I don't know if you follow my logic. Our culture is such that you'll have a child, the parents of a child would take a child to another family, like, can you raise my child for me? And they hand that child and all matters that concern that child to their family without any proof of any transaction going on. We have our families in Africa, one income would take care of like 70 people in the bag, you know. So these are the things that the African Charter took into consideration when addressing issues that concern children's rights, which the CRC would not pay particular attention to. So if I had to remove a child, for example, who's being abused, the first thing I'll look for is a family member who is willing to accept that child versus foster care or institutionalization in the West. You know, so even when you go to the village and see a child who is suffering, the first thing is that I'll take this child with me. You don't have to pass through a social worker or something. So these are things that like in many other treaties, you would find that the regional bodies would create something similar to what the Universal Treaty is trying to achieve, but make it in such a way that it applies to their context. It takes into account the poverty, the socioeconomy, the political, and the fact that at the time when the African Charter was being ratified, was being promulgated, there was a lot of civil war in Africa, and it was affecting children disproportionately versus what was happening in Europe. So to answer your second question, both treaties are of the same status. They are all international treaties, and they would all apply to the country that subscribes to them. And you would see that in a country, for example, where these abuses are very prevalent, they would not accede to that treaty. Nobody's going to force you. And those practices will continue. If you look at all the treaty areas where, let's just look at Cameroon, they have not signed the Treaty of Rome. Why? Because they're prone to torture. The other countries where FGM is very prominent, they will not sign the treaties on women empowerment and things like that. Or the countries where women are suppressed, women's rights are suppressed, and women are not considered, they will not sign those treaties. But that gives you a bad reputation in the international community as well. So for certain diplomatic reasons, some countries would say that before we can grant you a loan, especially with the World Bank and IMF, you must have certain human rights records. Yeah. So it compels these other countries to join for financial reasons and all of that. That's why you find these countries, acceding to treaties that are even contrary to their own beliefs and cultures. But then you would still see that there's no implementation because of the conflict in the culture. That's what happens with FGM in Liberia and Sierra Leone right now. Even though the laws are there, the political will to implement those laws are missing. But you would see that maybe they have signed these treaties because they needed a foreign aid that was coming in, but there's absence of political will. I hope that answers.
Yeah, that really helps, but I find it very peculiar that majority of the countries that have not adhered to that treaty, probably they're experiencing the highest number of these kinds of human rights abuse. And just wondering if there's a direct correlation there between, among countries.
Without even interrupting, but if I listen to Joyce well and Brian, you would see that Mono always says, if you don't look for something, you will not see it. And politically, whenever you reject as a country from ratifying something, that's when the attention of researchers are paid to your country to look for something, and certainly they will see it. Then those who ratify it, because they have ratified, researchers don't go there to look for something, and they don't see it, and don't mean that it does not happen. That's my personal taking. So whenever, and I did diplomacy in Columbia University, and I realized that it's a very, 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 very silly and I pray, I thank God I was never a diplomat because I will not sleep. There's so much going on in the world that you can't understand with an ordinary eye. Because when they stand up to tell you that this is so much in this country, research is focused on that country, maybe because that country didn't ratify, doesn't mean that those countries that ratified are doing the right thing. Those countries that ratified might not just be doing the right thing. They might have ratified for economic reasons, just like Joyce said, and they are not implementing it. That's why people say Cameroon has the best policy, but does not implement none of them. But that doesn't mean that we are the best countries because we have ratified human rights. We have a, sorry to say, this is a recorded platform, but it's also public information. We have a gay diplomat as a United States diplomat in Cameroon, but Cameroon is anti-gay based on its laws. That's diplomacy. You can't stand against something. You have to. There are things you have to recognize what you want to, give away based on what you want to get. These are clear issues. These are public information. I'm not creating it. Everyone knows the Cameroon ambassador to the in Cameroon, the US ambassador to Cameroon is gay. It's not, Elvis is not the one saying it. On the day of his appointment, he thanked his girlfriend or boyfriend, sorry, which means he's a girl. So these are public information. But if you, as Brian in Mokolo, says that you are a girl, that you are a boy, or no, that you are a girl and you're thanking your boyfriend, they will lock you up. But that's diplomacy. So there are a lot of issues in diplomacy that with ordinary eyes we cannot see. But I think what Joyce is trying to let us just understand is that it's not everyone that is called a victim that is a victim in international relations. it might just be because they have not ratified some treaties. And I like one thing she says, it happens everywhere. Abuse happens everywhere. Even in those countries that have ratified those things, they even have the worst level of abuses.
True. If I may add something, right, the reason why these treaty bodies are important, these treaties are important is because they create with them treaty bodies. So there's a reporting system. So if your rights are violated, say this young girl's rights are violated in Congo, if Congo had signed that treaty, she's able to report to the Human Rights Committee or the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and an investigation would be done. But when you're not ratified the treaty, you have no other avenue to seek for justice. So usually you would have to start at the local courts to report that you've been held in marriage against your will, for example, and your case would go for a trial through the local courts, maybe up to the Supreme Court. And if you're not satisfied with that decision, you have the right to petition the CRC, the Committee on Children's Rights, who would carry out an investigation, and they're able to give a judgment that would hold the state responsible. So it goes a long way, and that is why treaties are important, and that's why we're able to access, justice from different areas in international law, because the country ratified that law and refused to implement that law. You have the right to remedy from the treaty bodies.
Okay, thank you, Joyce. We have a Vivian Munchi, whose hand is up. Hi, Vivian.
Hello.
Yes, please take it away. Maybe just introduce yourself, tell us where you're calling from, and then you can ask your question.
Oh, I'm Vivian. I live in Maryland, in the USA. And I don't know, I joined because I thought this was a very relevant topic. And so I've been listening, and I get a lot of stuff that's already, like, I can go and read most of it. And I get a whole background on child abuse, and I know it's prevalent in Cameroon, and I think that abuse is abuse. It doesn't matter what culture. You can have cultural interpretation of abuse, but it does not stop it from being abuse. You can call it whatever you want to call it. And so if we don't accept that abuse is prevalent, it doesn't matter the context that it occurs. Like, you can look at the context. And another thing that I want to say is that even in the US, there's cultural context of abuse in the US, because every person that leaves Cameroon and comes to the US, they bring their culture. And we in the US as well, we battle with female genital mutilation. We talk about physical abuse, sexual abuse, cultural abuse, things that will come from Cameroon is still prevalent in the US. And so when we address it, we still look at the cultural context of it. You cannot remove the culture from, even if it's the African-American culture, it's still culture. And you still have to look at the cultural context of abuse. But my question that I was gonna ask, and I'll ask Joyce, is that, can she tell us some success stories? Because we've seen like the really worst of the worst. If you come and someone comes to you and is being abused, what will you do? I just want to know what, like, generally, how will it be handled? Like, if somebody is being abused, you see it, like you talked about the child that goes to give food and is being raped. In Cameroon, what choices does she have? Or is she, and you said that the law was somehow ineffective. What options does this child have?
Okay, thank you so much for your question. And to correct, I did not say the law was not ineffective. I said usually the law is not resorted to, especially in issues of reporting the incident in the first place. So the options available to the child, because she's a minor already, and that's one of the things that makes it more so important that we talk about this. Children do not have legal capacity. So she cannot even initiate a case on her own accord. Someone has to be able to stand in her place to represent her in court. So one of the things I was going to suggest as a recommendation was that we have to educate these children about their rights and how to report abuse. If she, for example, was raped and she's aware that the social welfare office is around the corner, and I can go there and tell my story to this person, or she knows that there's an NGO somewhere like Kumo Fedfed that works with girls and young children, or one of them just skipped my mind, the Catholic Charities or something, she's able to go there. Once you're able to report to an authority, then they can take it up from there. We've had cases where children have gone to report, especially the Catholic charities, and they would brief a lawyer and initiate a proceeding. But when the child is not aware of how to go about this, and in general in Cameroon, people do not know how to report a rape or what to do if they are raped. How do you keep the evidence of rape? How do you report a rape without destroying evidence of rape? So it all boils down to education of the children of what their rights are. How do I report this abuse? And we've had cases, believe it or not, of children who have success stories, definitely. It's just that if out of every 20 girls who are raped, only one manages to get convicted, you wouldn't celebrate the success because 19 have gone unpunished. There are success stories, but the statistics show that not many of these rapists are prosecuted. We've still had people come to court on a case of rape and agree to an amicable settlement. If we
Joyce,
are not,
can I?
Yes.
Sorry, can I say something first?
Yes, you can.
So the first thing that I have a problem with is putting the burden of reporting on a child, because as we know, based on child development, a child might not be able to, they're easily convinced, right? A child could be in a position where you could say, so there's this thing they call statutory rape. If a child is 13 years old and is dating a teacher that's 45 years old, that's rape. I don't know if it's rape in Cameroon.
It is rape.
Is that
there's statutory rape? Yes, from 16.
So the child will not even know that, so even if you report it, that difference, that power difference between that child and that teacher, we put that burden on the child, but the child should not be in the place to report. So what are the systems that are going to protect that child? So we talk about child protection, right? So in schools, who reports if a 45-year-old is going out with a 13-year-old? That's my question.
And maybe, Joyce, maybe before you jump in, I'm just going to add this part of the question. What are the financial implications, for this kind of reporting, maybe as you're answering Vivian's questions? Because everybody knows that affording a lawyer is not easy. Are there any, is it free? Is it free? Are they find the legal fees covered by any form or system or anything like that? So how do we afford to pay a lawyer?
Are there institutions in Cameroon that are offering pro bono services for those who are going through this kind of things and want to report but don't have the means?
Okay, it's a very beautiful question. So I'll start with Vivian's question, right? So you remember when I was talking about the absence of safeguarding in the first place? That is one of the things I was talking about. If people are not trained to identify that this is wrong, how would they report it? Most people are like, it's not my business, and they just go away. Or they'll go and beat up the girl child because she's going out. That's what they call sugar daddies. It's very rampant in our community. So if you heard clearly, I said, there's an absence of safeguarding. There's no policies in place. There's no training in place for staff. There's no enforcement obligation by the government that anyone who comes in contact with a student should not be that kind of person. I know in the US, if you have any history with rape or sexual abuse or anything, you're in a registry. And you can always check your phone and they'll tell you how many meters a sexual predator is from you. You're aware at every time that there's someone around here, I should be careful, I should lock my door, who has had a history with children in the past or with rape in the past. We lack that kind of database in Cameroon. So we have the absence of safeguarding. And that is why I've been talking about protection the whole time, because safeguarding is not existent. But to answer your question further, if it were reported that this 45-year-old man is going out with this, let's say 13-year-old girl, right? Someone has to be able to bring the case to court. And the 13-year-old girl does not have the legal capacity to do that. She doesn't have she doesn't have the age to do that. So her parent must be able to do it, or she can report to an officer, whether it's a social welfare, whether it's the police or somebody, she must be able to make that report to initiate it. If her parents are not willing to, but if her parents are willing to, then they can initiate the proceedings on behalf of the child. But when it comes to prosecution, so if you're reporting the child is reporting, the child is a victim, the state will prosecute on behalf of the child.
Joyce, I really feel emotional here because I want to put myself in place of a vulnerable child. And I see a situation where a lot of parents, because of economic interest and poverty, can take their responsibility to report. And then the child is vulnerable because maybe the parent has an economic interest with the abuser. The parent does not want to take the case up and the child cannot do that. You mentioned a while in your presentation, when those who are supposed to protect the rights of those being abused are the abusers, then it complicates the entire process of, reporting and, protection. I want to imagine, I work at Columbia University, and I want to imagine the day I was signing my contract to work as an officer of administration at Columbia University in clinical research. I cannot, in my capacity now as an officer, date an undergraduate student in Columbia University, no matter how beautiful she is. By my virtue of my capacity in that university, I cannot. If I have to have a sexual relationship with a master's student, I have to report that in case that master's student has any supervisory role that maybe I might have to handle. These are things that the institution has consciously taken a decision about to protect abuses that has to do with power dynamics, because there are abuses that has to do with power dynamics. That happens in the University of Boya. Every blessed day, girls are being abused in the university because of power dynamics. Lecturers abusing students.
And boys
being
too, sorry.
Unable to consume, being unable to report it. Girls being unable to report it, subduing it because